Check the description for the following discount codes. This is a video where I want your thoughts and feedback really. It's a conversation I had with another sim racing YouTuber the other day. We were talking about WRC23 and how it released. There was no triple screen support, no UDP, telemetry support for things like motion, tactile transducers, LCD displays, wind simulators, things like this. They had D-Box support, but that was it. And we were kind of having this discussion saying, you know, the bottom line is, Carl, it's the masses that they're catering to. It's the console audience, you know, Xbox, PlayStation. They are by far the biggest part of the gaming industry market. That's who they really want to aim their games and products. And us as sim racers, so simulation racers, people who like to build a simulator, like you see in the background there, something that replicates as close to real life as we can get, are very much in the minority. You know, I'm not just talking having a steering wheel to race on. You know, that's something you've been able to do since the console days. In fact, the early console days. I've got an old Sega Saturn wheel up there, and even here you might have seen this in the thumbnail if I used it. My Tomy Turbo dashboard. You know, this was mid 80s, early 80s. Even back then, gamers, you know, were deciding they want to try and replicate what it's like to race a car. So you've got your little steering wheel, you've got your gear shifter, which is actually also how you control your speed in this. You've even got an ignition key, you've got like your RP, a tacho gauge, you've got a fuel gauge that actually goes down as you're driving, a speedo, and a tripometer, which is kind of your score. It's how far you get. So even back then, you know, the world knew we wanted to try and pretend we're racing real cars at home, and this does actually work, in case anyone's curious. You just turn this light off there and you'll be able to see the screen. Zero that out. There we go. And then you basically try not to hit the trees. So, you know, even, I never thought I'd feature this in a video, but even back in the 80s, people were trying, you know, to simulate, turn this light back on, simulate the driving or racing experience in the home. Now things have come a long way since this. Obviously, it's quite funny actually because it runs on these huge D-cell batteries that you don't really use for anything these days, but that we used in everything back in the 80s. Anyway, I'm getting slightly sidetracked. Yeah, so we were talking about how it seems to be that everything is now aimed at the console side of things, particularly when WRC23 came out, and we were sort of saying it's a bit worrying, we're slightly concerned that real simulation titles, and by that I mean titles that want to accurately replicate real world racing as much as is possible, and this is on not just on the, you know, the laser scan tracks, the real world cars, you know, the handling of vehicles, but that supports all the hardware we have available to us as sim racers. So everything from triple screens to VR, of course, these days, the UDP telemetry output to support motion, not just like a D-Box specific one, like we saw with WRC23, but that enables motion from all different manufacturers. PT Actuator, for example, my Scorpions and my Lowrider from Race at Home. Things like the Next Level Racing motion system they have, their seat mover, and then their traction plus, I think it might be called, for the that slide left and right, you know, and then all the other, you know, the SFX 100, SFX 1000 sort of DIY one that people use. These all need that UDP telemetry output. Then you've got Sim Hub software that lets you use everything from base shakers to wind simulation, you know, running some fans, speed-based fans, wind curving, shift lights, RPM gauges, flag displays, you know, leaderboard displays on little LCD screens or tablets. All this sort of stuff makes a difference between playing a game and driving in a simulator. And there seems to be less and less titles coming out that support the full simulation experience. If we look at what's been around for a while now. Assetto Corsa came out in 2014, Assetto Corsa Competizione 2018, iRacing 2008, and then when we look at rally titles, Richard Burns Rally is still considered sort of top of the tree from a simulation point of view, 2004. Now, of course, these have all received updates over time, but some of these are ridiculously old, 20 years old for Richard Burns Rally. And people are still playing it because, in spite of Dirt Rally 1 and 2, which were as close to simulation as you could really get, the rest of the Dirt series was very much arcadey. WRC titles were coming close, but I think that for me personally, Dirt Rally 1 and 2 were closer to simulation than WRC stuff, but everyone will have their opinions on that. And a lot of us had our hopes pinned on WRC 23 being, like Dirt Rally 3, so to speak, and, coming out with triple screen support, VR support, UDP telemetry output for all those good toys that I mentioned a minute ago. And, they say they've got VR coming. UDP was added in a patch a few days ago, and we may get triples further down the line. But you can see how, and it's that game that spurred the conversation I had, you can see how things are very much focused on just where the money is, and like I say, we were chatting and we're slightly worried that while sim racing hardware seems to be continually moving forward, we're getting better and better cockpits, wheelbases, shifters, motion solutions, tactile solutions, LCDs, but all this stuff is moving forward and getting better, but we're still running it on the same old titles for a full simulation experience. Even things like Microsoft Flight Simulator, the one that launched, was it 2020 launched? And that didn't come with triple screen support straight away. And you might argue that of all the simulation titles, and that's literally called Microsoft Flight Simulator, it should have come with that out the box. The flight sim community are like myself included. It's like, well, I've got to play it on a single screen. It's a simulation title, It did come later, of course, but it's just quite obvious, I think, to most of us that they're all prioritising console users, people that are going to be playing on Xbox controllers, PlayStation controllers, and perhaps in racing titles, wheels, of course, although, again, I'm referencing WRC 23 a lot here, but that's because it's the most recent sim title to come out, and this really shows a disparity between what's come with that and what came with Assetto Corsa Competizione, for example, what's still in iRacing and AC now and what isn't in that. So I'm going to be referencing it because it's the most relevant title. Not that I have a bug to bear with WRC 23, although it is a little annoying that it didn't come, as a full simulator, but that's just what seems to be the case from Codemasters and EA. The Dirt Rally Series 1 and 2 weren't really full simulators either. They still didn't have triple screen support, although they do support VR and they did have telemetry output, at least by the end of their life. So, yeah, we're a little worried because hardware's moving forward and less titles are coming out that make use of it. And are we going to end up in a situation where sim racing hardware manufacturers are going, hold on a minute, there's nobody to sell our shiny new products to because there's no sim racing titles coming out that use all of these things we have to offer. For example, what's the point in selling, a triple screen monitor stand or a 4-screen monitor stand? A lot of people like to have 3 for the sort of in-game world and then 1 up here with all the race data on. There'll be no point manufacturing and selling such things, at least not in volume whereby the prices are competitive, if there are no titles coming out that use it, and eventually these older ones, like I mentioned, Assetto Corsa, iRacing, Richard Burns Rally, for example, are going to stop working, or they're going to have to be patched by third parties. And again, when I talk about sim racing titles coming out and supporting everything out of the box, I do mean out of the box. So not having, a third party have to come in and add UDP telemetry because it was there for D-Box and they've had to take the D-Box stream and convert it to the UDP protocol for people like SimHub to be able to use it. I really mean something that's designed for simulation races. People like me who invest in as much as we can, triple screens, VR, motion, tactile, wind, separate LCD displays, to really, active seat belts, things like that. This all runs off of the UDP stream, and it all really needs to be supported in the game from the get-go as a simulation title, and we just don't seem to be getting them. We get an array of new wheelbases. At the moment, the sim racing hardware market is just exploding. Everything from cockpits to wheelbases. It's just blowing up everywhere. So many new manufacturers have entered the scene in the last few years. Moza, Acertech, for example, Camus, to list a few. Some are not so good, some are very good. But the market's getting saturated. And I mean, the likes of Acertech don't yet have console support, so they are only targeting the PC portion of the market, which is probably fairly small. I haven't actually looked at the data to see what it's like compared to consoles, but we all know consoles are going to be, up there. So we just worry a little bit, and this is what I'd like your thoughts on in the comments. Are we, seeing the decline almost of proper simulation titles? And are we just going to keep seeing more and more, console-focused games rather than driving simulation titles going forward? Things like the WRC series, the F1 series, even Need for Speeds, they get a new title every couple of 3 years, or every year in some instances, if you look at the F1. And they're obviously, they're games, they're not simulation titles. They're arcadey, and they're designed for, controller use primarily. So is this just the way it's going to be? And gradually, as time goes on, and the older titles that do support all the hardware that we have gradually fade into the background, are we all going to end up being pushed, onto just a basic wheel and pedals setup? Or do you think we are going to see some new real driving simulation titles come out? I mean, even just in a perfect world, in a perfect world, you'd like one to cover every genre, wouldn't you? F1, GT3, rally, you want one for go-kart, and you want one for everything, I suppose, because everybody wants something slightly different. So that's probably asking a little bit much, but I'm just curious to hear what other people think. Is the hardware, roaring away into the future, and the games or simulation titles that we have to play not really keeping up pace, and if anything, kind of fading into the background? Fnatic have recently added Full Force to their CS. It's not the CSLDD. It's CS Club Sport DD and Club Sport DD Plus, which works in the same fashion to the True Force from the Logitech wheelbases. That uses the UDP telemetry stream, but it has to be built into the game to support the Fnatic Full Force and the Logitech True Force, and it basically uses the wheelbase motor like a transducer. Will at Boosted Media did a great video reviewing those two. I think it came out yesterday, and he played some music through the actual wheelbase itself. So the motor itself was producing frequencies, because that's how tactile feedback works, is audio frequencies. And I mean, I'll very briefly share my opinion on Full Force and True Force. I think running it through the wheelbase then detracts from the force feedback clarity, because the motor can only either move left or right at any one point in time. So if you're getting it to produce sounds, like effect rumbles, gear change thuds, then it can't also simultaneously be giving you accurate force feedback. It can only move in one direction at a time. It's just how a motor works. It rotates. I mean, the same goes for a tactile transducer, but they are designed to reproduce frequencies, and a bit like a speaker, really. If you want treble, you have a tweeter. If you want mid-range, you have a mid. If you want bass, you have a woofer, and they're appropriately sized to reproduce each part of the frequency range. If you try and use a 12-inch woofer to produce some treble that would normally come out of a 1-inch tweeter, it's going to sound really muffled, like my hands over my face, like that. You choose the appropriate piece of hardware to do the job that you want it to do. So trying to get a force feedback motor to to essentially vibrate like a speaker will detract from the clarity of your force feedback. And Will did mention this in his review, and I mentioned it when I reviewed the Logitech wheelbase as well. So, I mean, again, for console use, and this is again where we're going, console users who don't have a PC with a telemetry data output, that you can USB you can just plug in, or a sound card, which is what we use with our tactile transducers. We use a different 5-channel sound card, and we use something like Sim Hub or Sim Racing Studio to send the telemetry from the game through the software to the sound card and out of the different channels. Transducers, 2 at the front, 1 for each wheel, 2 at the back, 1 for each wheel, maybe 1 under the seat. And we can choose what goes where. Console users don't have the ability to do that very easily. I think 1 or 2 titles you can work around it, but it's not out of the box support and it's not easy to do. But what is easy to do is implement it in the game, full force and true force, and just use your motor in your wheelbase to vibrate and reproduce those effects. So the effects would be things like engine RPM, road texture, lumps, bumps, impacts, gear changes, things like that. So it's not the best way to do it because you're muddying up your force feedback. But if you're aiming it at the console market, who don't have any other options easily available, it's a new feature they can use as a selling point, like with the new Fanatic wheelbases. And you will, if you tune it carefully, get a reasonable experience. If you crank it up too much, you're going to absolutely ruin your force feedback, just like I did with the Logitech one that I was testing, and just like Will demonstrated in his review of the Fanatic wheelbases. But if you have it subtle and you don't have all the effects on at once, in which case it's just a mess of noise and vibration coming from your steering wheel, then it may enhance the experience over not having it. But again, Fanatic have obviously looked at the market and gone, right, well, we sell mostly to consoles, so let's add something in that not only PC users can use, because that full force will work on PC as well, but that everybody can use. And that's now something that we've got on our 12 Newton meter and 16 Newton wheelbases that nobody else has, bar the Logitech wheelbase, of course. So you can see where the marketing is going, and how some now hardware manufacturers are also focusing on the bigger part of the market. At least this is my opinion and my take on things, at whatever we are midway through November in 2023. So I just thought it was an interesting topic to sort of spark some conversation about. So let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think we're seeing a decline in real simulation driving titles? And do you think game and simulation manufacturers and programmers are focusing more on the console side of things, like we sort of quite clearly see with WRC 23? Do you think sim racing hardware is still developing at a rate of knots and almost to the point of saturation? Which bloody wheelbase do I choose? There's so many to choose from now. And are they going to be left with a shrinking PC simulation market because we just don't have the titles to utilise that hardware? Or if we do, we're still using old titles from up to 20 years ago. Anyway, I'll be curious to hear what you all think. So thanks for listening to my 20 minutes of bloody waffle. Goodness, I thought it was going to be a 5-10 minute video. Thank you all very much for listening. I look forward to reading your comments in the comments. As always, take it easy.